Welcome to Champlain Presents. I'm Scout Fishman.
I'm Olivia Lyons. We have a great show for you, but first, we want you to know we're celebrating a 5-year anniversary. It's the 5th time the broadcast program at Champlain College has done this senior showcase.
This time around, what that means is 12 of us, all seniors, made 6 documentaries, each about 10 minutes long. Ooh, what a project.
That's for sure. But before we get too far, we should point out Scout and I are just 2 of the 5 anchors for this program. We're getting help from Skylar, Max, and Alex. Come on in, guys.
Hey, guys.
Good morning. So anyway, part of the idea behind all of this was for us to produce longer form pieces and put our skills to the test.
But it was also about telling good stories. Many of those stem from things we've learned about while we've been in school. So here's what you're going to see. We're going to the fields of Johnson, Vermont, where one hemp grower takes us into the world of permaculture, a sustainable approach to creating habitat.
We're going to the fields of rugby. 2 of our classmates give an inside local look at this hard-hitting and increasingly popular sport.
Audio engineers. They're the ones behind the scenes of sound design. Our very own audio geeks go deep with these masters of sound.
When the living room's a stage, 2 of us did something pretty cool. We went to house concerts in Vermont, Connecticut, and Canada to understand why they are so unique.
Identity. College makes us raise profound questions about who we are and what comes next. One of our classmates writes a personal essay about her life and her friends. Our first piece is about something that many of us wouldn't associate with Vermont: human trafficking. Recent reporting has put a spotlight on why trafficking is referred to as a crime that no one knows about.
But because of addiction, poverty, and desperation, too many people in our communities are essentially held hostage, working and living in places they can't escape.
Skylar Gann, Dan Calcane, and Hayden Graham did a piece about trafficking victims and the people who are trying to help them. Their story is called In Plain Sight.
It doesn't just start at the trafficking experience, it starts more with the vulnerabilities that I had as a kid, and that was what got me into my trafficking situation. It doesn't just happen. I was just on this broken path, and I carried a lot of shame. But I knew I never wanted to become a prostitute. Like, that wasn't anything I ever dreamt of.
Jasmine Grace Marino has been working to fight human trafficking, but her role as an activist is only part of the picture. Jasmine was a trafficking victim, working as a prostitute for more than 5 years. When she was just 19, she met a guy just a couple years older than her.
And he bought me a drink, and we exchanged phone numbers, and I was, impressed because someone paid attention to me, and he seemed to have a lot of money, and he was dressed nicely. I was intrigued because I had never dated a guy like that, and I didn't notice the red flags. There's plenty of red flags, but I wasn't aware.
Not long after, the guy she thought was her boyfriend took her to meet up with one of her female friends, who, it turned out, was also a victim.
He took me to her house, and she was living in a nice, affluent, expensive area of Boston. And I walk into the home, and it's big and beautiful, and she has, expensive cars in the driveway. She wasn't in any danger, it didn't appear. She wasn't handcuffed to anything. She wasn't drugged. If anything, she looked good. So I was convinced that, okay, maybe it's not that bad.
That was the beginning, a story similar to so many others. Stories of human trafficking, stories of victims of a crime that happens in plain sight. Trafficking has taken many forms in Vermont and has been present for quite some time. Ken Picard, a journalist at 7 Days, Vermont's local weekly newspaper, has been covering human trafficking stories for years. He became aware of this in 2003 when he investigated Mexican immigrants working on dairy farms.
At the time, I wasn't really thinking about that as a human trafficking story. As I went down there and started talking to some of these guys, it became very obvious very quickly that none of them were in the country illegally, and that they were living under conditions that, looking back now, I realize they were being taken advantage of in many different ways.
The workers had tight living spaces, little free time, and were in constant fear of being harassed by authorities. Throughout his reporting, Picard discovered situations similar to the one in 2003, this time in local massage parlors and restaurants.
Often these are people who owe debts to somebody, so they were brought into the country, perhaps illegally, and so they get on a van in Chinatown in New York City, take a van someplace in the country, come up to Vermont. They may not even know they're here in Vermont.
In 2013, Picard went to Essex Junction to inspect a house where people were being kept. What he saw was shocking.
It's this big old Victorian house that's been sort of subdivided into little rooms. And every room has a padlock on it, and at night the workers would come back and they would padlock them in. It was very small, and it had hand-built bunk beds with four or six beds in there. The windows were all covered with newspapers. The ceiling was leaking. I was told that there were 26 people who lived in this house.
Jasmine didn't live in such conditions. Her so-called boyfriend was requiring her to take regular trips to a brick building in Hartford, Connecticut.
No one probably knew what was going on, but it's hidden in plain sight. There was probably 10 to 15 women there, young girls and older women, very different in age. And then the sex buyers would come in and pay a door fee, and they would come into the lounge and they'd scan the room, and then they would pick the girl that they want. You do whatever you do for the hour or the half hour. I was just so disgusted. But at the same time, once it was finished, I looked down and I had maybe $80 or $100, and I just tried to focus on that.
But soon, Jasmine would understand the money wasn't hers.
And we go to get out of the car, I had this pocket full of money, and he puts his hand out. And I knew that gesture meant to hand over the money, but I just start logically thinking in my mind, well, why would I give you the money? I just did all that, you weren't even there. Wait, are you my pimp or are you my boyfriend? And I hand over the money, and I felt like I lost my voice, I lost my courage.
Helping victims find courage is essential to becoming a survivor. Edith Klimovsky directs the Give Way to Freedom Foundation, where survivors of trafficking can get help.
So basic needs like housing, getting a job or an education, and just predictability in their life.
Because of her work, Edith knows the signs and patterns that lead to someone getting exploited.
Indicators of human trafficking are many, and they're also applicable to other things that might be going on in a person's life. But really, poverty is really the baseline piece of basically human dignity that is missing. What that creates are push and pull factors that can be quite nuanced. But most people are, trying to provide for themselves and or their families, and they want to be able to do that. What happens is, while they're trying to do that, they're vulnerable to people exploiting them. And so the exploiters will either notice that someone has a history of domestic violence, is trying to flee, and then try to pull them in to a situation where they can exploit and traffic them.
Eventually, Jasmine's captor made her go to Craigslist to find more customers.
I meet a sex buyer online, and he didn't want anything sexual. Changed his mind, what happened? But he paid me a lot of money, and then week after week he would call me, and I'd go to his house and we'd hang out and watch TV, like SpongeBob. But I started to feel safe with this guy because he wasn't touching me or hurting me. And this guy that I had been seeing owned his own small business, and so I reached out to him and I asked him if he'd lie and say I worked for him so I could get my own place. And he did.
Jasmine was introduced to independence, but still went back and forth with the pimp, who at one point beat her up badly. She ultimately went to the police. It was the start of her escape that began with one man she trusted. People who reach out to victims are key, but sometimes technology can play a similar role. Professor Dwayne Dunstan is developing an app called You Have a Voice. It's a questionnaire to be administered in hospitals designed to help victims.
It's designed to bridge the communication barrier between trafficking survivors or victims and a service provider. The communication barrier is the most problematic, and again, even if they speak the same language.
Getting victims to talk can be difficult because they're often coached not to. Dwayne believes his app might be a way around that.
People are more likely to respond to sensitive questions via a computer assessment, and that's pretty universal as well. Having to look someone in the eye and then tell them what happened to them can be traumatizing. And if the person asking questions asks questions that are not sensitive, they can re-traumatize the person. We have about over 30 languages, including American Sign Language, which is just for video. And we are also working on audio as well.
Have you ever felt you could not leave the place where you worked or did other activities?
What we're hoping is that this application can be that electronic version can be that bridge to allow them to have a voice without having to say anything.
Apps like this show more people are paying attention and working to end the trafficking crisis. As a survivor, Jasmine is working toward the same goal.
It's been about 5 years. I've been doing work in the anti-trafficking movement. I've written a book, The Diary of Jasmine Grace. It's all my old journal entries from when I was trafficked with present day reflections. It's amazing. We give out so many books to women that we meet that, they read it and they can't believe that's my life too, and again, like the light bulbs go on and the healing begins because they realize they're not alone. And then I developed bags of hope as a way to reach out to women that are in vulnerable situations. We make these bags filled with basic items, socks, shampoo, conditioner, toothpaste. We give out over 1,000 bags a year, and we give them out to vulnerable women, detoxes, domestic violence shelters, homeless shelters, women on the street, anywhere we can find vulnerable women. So it's just been amazing how we've seen women grow. My organization has grown to 4 of us, which is pretty cool. Another woman who's a recovery coach, and then 2 other survivors. So it's amazing. We've met these women, and now we've mentored them, and now they're speaking and telling their story and mentoring women. So it's nothing better than seeing other women rise up and be empowered and encouraged, and I'm able to pass the baton, so that's great.
The efforts of people like Jasmine and others are more than courageous. They're trying to make a difference for people who were enslaved, here in Vermont and everywhere. The problem is pervasive. Human trafficking thrives in the shadows of our society, in plain sight.
We're here with the filmmakers, Skylar, Hayden, and Dan. How are you guys?
Good. How are you? Good.
So, how did you come up with this topic?
Well, originally we started with a professor at Champlain who was in the documentary, Dwayne Dunstan. But as our original goal was to make it about the digital fight against human trafficking. But as we worked on it, we kind of discovered that the rabbit hole goes much deeper and that it was actually a really large issue in Vermont and New England in general.
What was your reaction when you found out how prevalent it is in Vermont?
So I think we were all super shocked about it. We found out that it was very widespread and that it's a problem all across the country, not just Vermont. And we just didn't know about it, and so we wanted to figure out more about it.
And what difficulties did you face when you were interviewing the victim?
Yeah, it was a really tricky subject for us because we didn't want to ask questions that were going to re-traumatize the survivor. We wanted to make sure to have a comfortable environment so that they could answer honestly, truthfully, and give us the best version of their story that they could. And we're just grateful that we got her and we got such a good interview out of it.
That's great. Thank you.
Managing and supporting ecosystems is the key idea behind our next story on farming. The approach is called permaculture, and it's the idea that there's a relationship between one crop and its neighbor, but between what we grow and what we build.
Our classmates Kirsten Potts and Scout Fishman made a Facebook contact with the main character of this next piece and decided he'd be a good story. He's a man dedicated to spreading the ideas of permaculture and applying it to his hemp crop in Johnson, Vermont.
Kirsten and Scout's story is called Growing a Vision.
The start of Willow Crossing Farm really was, I was 21 at the time. I was really anxious to start farming in a kind of different model. Essentially, I was living out of a station wagon, like collecting nut seeds and traveling around with like pine nuts in pots and sleeping with a bicycle in a big brown like spaceship wagon. It's an interesting story too because part of it was like portraying that vision and really talking about pollination protection and creating habitat and reforesting, more diversity in our food systems that kind of eventually like ended up on the phone with like the seller's wife, and I think like she kind of got the vision, and that's I think a part of the power of permaculture is sort of being really clear with our intentions and putting out the vision.
Shadow. They're behind you.
Philosophy of our farm is looking at how our access to the places and species that our nourishment comes from is healing. Not only to us, but also to those places, and kind of how we work with that in both directions. I came to farming as an activist, really, and you know, didn't come from a farming background and still have everything to learn. And I think, you know, my farm is a farm in some regards, but it's also a wild cooking experiment and a plant collection and a fool's errand. You know, there's many different definitions of permaculture. One that I really like is the postmodern synthesis of all wise human behavior. How do we put plants together in the best ways for them to support each other and be productive also of our needs? And how do we put our homes in relation to our gardens, in relation to our waste and energy and the sun and wind in ways that create the most harmony and meet our needs while increasing ecologic health? And building buildings that harvest some of their own energy and utilize their wastes as resources, and that are intimately connected in their landscapes for the ease of our work and for protection from cold winter winds, for easy harvest of firewood. So it's really trying to look at how all these systems sort of fit together in an organismic-like way. And so permaculture is most excitingly applied in our suburban lawns, in our urban parking lots, in degraded hayfields, and looking at how we start to take responsibility for human-dominated landscapes and turn them into human-facilitated ecosystems. My history with cannabis lends me to really value this plant and see its potential. It's exciting to watch people combating epilepsy. It's incredible to get testimonials from people who use this medicine, from people who are also really looking for direct relationship with this medicines. And as part of that, of course, medicinal herbs have been a central part of our farm for some time.
When you put hemp or CBD in something, people are much more likely to use it, which is great because I feel like with some people, herbs can be kind of a hard sell. We know it's a useful herb, and it like helps open the door for all the other plants to come in.
So we have an advantage. As our farm gets more chaotic, it also gets more productive of some of these more obscure plants. That and the alliance with the healing arts has kind of been a part of our philosophy from the beginning.
And this is so important, where I'm gonna just praise Keith to the moon and back. He gives his medicine at a cost where everyone can make it themselves. And this is what's so important. And if people are actually concerned about healing and making medicine for people, then this is what their concern should be. You always end up with an abundance, and then your friends want some and neighbors want some, and before you know it, you become a community herbalist, and it's very wonderful to be able to provide healing aspects for people.
It's really interesting to look at the chemistry of medicinal plants and start breaking down specific compounds and looking at how they affect our bodies.
And I'm helping people one-on-one to basically like tend their internal gardens, right? And like the zone zero that we talk about in permaculture of like, okay, what's happening in here? Because everything connects to everything else. What's happening in here is gonna affect what's happening in my home and in my community and in the world. And so like, we all have to start somewhere. And for me, like starting with the individual and how their health is and their connection with their own body, like that seems super key to me.
From what I can tell and see in hands-on experience is that when you isolate a compound, it does not have the entourage effect that the body would get with receiving. And everything that we have seen and even scientifically researching and knowing that THC is the active compound. So we actually need that active compound to open up our whole system.
Personally, yes, I'm of the philosophy that they do work best in concert. But like many things, it takes looking at the parts separate to understand how the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And it's exciting to be in the position as a nursery producing starts for, this growing demand for the plants themselves. We're even more excited to just stay doing what we do, which is teaching and, evaluating, collecting, having a nursery, doing trials and experiments, growing in different radical ways. So whether we call it permaculture or right livelihood or just manifesting reality, how do we best bring about the landscapes that we want to live in, bring about the buildings that we want to live in, look at our decisions from an intergenerational perspective. If we're going to be running around in motors and machines all day, every day, let's use them to put food systems in support of ecology in place, rather than use them to continue to pave over and undermine our knowledge of how to preserve food or save seed or grow anything. My practice in permaculture, experimenting and innovating at my farm, led to me helping other farmers, whether it was figuring out the position of buildings in their landscapes, and increasingly working as a designer led to work in education around this stuff.
I'm definitely going to look at specifically organic cannabis, specifically organic hemp.
Here at UVM, where we wanted to run a different model, and we ended up looking at, instead of these residential intensive courses, kind of expanding it into a semester-long course that would offer a full certification.
It was a really excellent class. I've been in touch with Keith ever since. I think that was about 10 years ago. So I've been out to his farm on numerous occasions. I go there for sourcing some new tree crops or things I'm adding to my garden back home. And as the hemp industry has kind of come into the mainstream here, we're really excited to be able to work and collaborate together as allies.
If you start seedlings before the spring solstice, those seedlings...
So it's really exciting because, permaculture influences our education in how it is explicitly interdisciplinary and starts really tying in, energy, architecture, agriculture, economics, and also everything we're learning in social sciences. So it's such a fun thing to share with people, and to share with people kind of with the invitation to go in their own directions. And so, students are starting farms, students are starting, consulting and design businesses. It's the work that we need to do to celebratorily address all the problems in the world and not get down about it is way more than work I can do myself. So I'm so happy to share the load and to see people take on different priorities, different problems.
Bending over and bonking my head on the
It's like the perfect height.
Nice one.
Honestly, I could see that working pretty efficiently.
We are currently joined by both Scout and KP. Really great job on the documentary. It's a very different topic, and I'm not sure how many people are aware of what's going on with permaculture. What drove you to go follow this documentary?
Well, in the beginning, when we were first talking to Keith Morris, I don't think either of us really knew exactly what permaculture was, but after talking to him a little bit more and learning a little bit more about the principles of it, I think we both realized that we share a lot of common values with it, and along with Keith Morris's philosophy as well, and just like about how everything's interconnected and humans living like within ecosystems and like the natural landscape that we live in, rather than being separated from it, I think is like really important, that idea that we wanted to like dive deeper into.
Great, and why should people care about permaculture?
Well, to be honest, we go through our day kind of thoughtlessly doing the norm, but by having something like permaculture and the philosophies that we share with Keith Morris, it allows us to grow regenerative and sustainable ecosystems that will be helpful for the future.
Awesome, thank you both.
Thank you.
If you don't know what a try or a scrum is, you're about to get an education. Rugby is one of the fastest growing sports in the US a lot of us don't know much about, even though the game is played worldwide.
But Alex Sabatel and John Angelos have played lots of rugby and wanted to explore the subject. The stories they tell are sometimes about pain and sacrifice, but also about love of an intense, high-contact sport.
John and Alex's piece is called Elegant Violence, a Rugby Story.
If you're playing, when you're done, if you are not drag out exhausted, I don't care who you are, you didn't try hard enough in my book. So you better be absolutely crawling off the field tired and just delirious at the end of the game, otherwise you didn't push yourself hard enough.
That test of will is known as rugby, one of America's fastest growing sports. Vermont is home to plenty of secret savages who can ruck, scrum, and scrap their way to national championships and hometown glory. These are stories of players who endure and cherish the hardships of a beautiful game. This is Elegant Violence, a rugby story.
Hey, my name is Cullen Seal, I'm 22, and I play rugby at UVM.
Cullen Seal never played rugby before he came to college.
So I played soccer in high school, and I was midfield, and I had to run a lot, and I preferred to sprint a little bit rather than run for 90 minutes straight. So I decided to try another sport after my roommate suggested it.
In 2014, Cullen picked up rugby at the University of Vermont. Watch number 11. This is Cullen playing wing on the outside.
Here we go.
So it was the first real game where there was actual contact, and I had to tackle people and run through hits, and I just kind of really enjoyed the physicality of it. I thought it was really raw, and I immediately liked it better than soccer.
There was something about the game that clicked with Cullen. The organization, the rules, the strategy. When at times he felt he lacked direction, rugby gave it to him.
What I liked about rugby was just how intense it was all the time. They demand you to have this certain grit attitude at all times to be able to keep moving, you know.
If you ask players, they'll tell you rugby is organized chaos. After a kickoff, the chaos begins. There are 15 players per side, split into forwards and backs. Players can't throw the ball forward. They can only throw it laterally or behind them. To score, you have to place the ball in what's called the try zone. A try is rugby's name for a touchdown. It's worth 5 points. After a penalty, there's a scrum, where all the forwards lock into a pack to contest for the ball. The job of the backs is to score.
So the wing is on the outside, and on offense, he just needs to track the play and figure out it's all about timing when you're on the wing. You have to be there at the right time, at the right place, with enough speed. Because if you overshoot it, you're useless.
Being useless is something no rugby player wants to be. In fact, they want to play so bad, many of them play through their pain.
Don't feel sorry for yourself. You just gotta keep going forward, no matter how hard it gets. And it's definitely rugby in a nutshell.
That stoic attitude can get some players in trouble. Cullen says he played an entire season with a torn hamstring.
I knew that if I took a bunch of Aleve, it would feel better. So I would wake up, pop like 4 or 5, start to hurt again, pop some more. I was doing a lot of Aleve a day, probably like 20, 30 Aleve just every day just to keep going. And eventually I had like a prescription to an anti-inflammatory painkiller. And then I just kept doing Aleve.
Some players may laugh at the use of medication, but it's a real part of rugby. Joey Bezel knows a thing about this because he was once a UVM player and is now a strength and conditioning coach for their team.
Yeah, so rugged candy, it's like just kind of a slang term that we threw around when I was playing. Every time you were done playing, you'd pop a few just so your body wasn't aching and horrible pain for a while afterwards, because you take a couple cuts and bruises and then you get a couple head knocks and you kind of want things to not hurt a little bit immediately. So yeah, it's just kind of a term of endearment for non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. Come on. Finish it out, lock it up. Good, let's rack it. Hey, boy. I've had a number of injuries. I've had my shoulders blown out. I've had a broken back. It's called spondylolisthesis. It's essentially a crack in the facet of the spine. My facet's been cracked and shifted in the L4, L5, so it essentially pinches down and it kind of clamps the nerve down. So I would lose sensation of feeling and kind of collapse on my leg, which is not a very good thing to do in rugby, so I kind of had to back off a little bit. For me, it's been a tumultuous ride for rugby. I really always wanted to play, but then after my second shoulder surgery, I decided to hang the cleats up and start coaching, which I did.
Joey's injuries are serious. He's got 19 metal pins in his shoulders, all because of rugby. So in 2014, he opened a gym in Shelburne where he could heal himself, but also help players. No doubt the game causes damage to the body, but physical conditioning can prevent injuries and help players recover from them. Part of Joey's job is to evaluate how players move so they don't get pummeled.
I'm not treating the symptom, I want to treat the root cause. So if I can see how they're moving, so when I'm out there on the rugby field and we're coaching at 6 in the morning and we can see how they're moving through things. So I see how Chris is moving, I see how Cullen's moving, and in doing that, aside from being in here, you're able to determine what movement patterns are kind of faulty.
Joe has provided a facility for us to get really good strength conditioning, and with a bunch of people who really are knowledgeable about what they're doing and can help you with your form and your mobility, which is the foundation of being able to lift the correct way.
As much as this training is designed to prevent injuries or heal from them, in rugby culture, the expectation remains: push hard, even when it hurts.
Mental fortitude is so underrated, particularly nowadays. I mean, everybody's so soft, and if you can come in here and push yourself physically, that has so much more to do with your mental capacity and your physical capacity. It really does.
Not all pain for rugby players is physical. For some, it is a mental battle. Here, at a match against a Boston club in Massachusetts, Courtney Vanderwielen is fighting for minutes. Look at number 14. This is Courtney protecting the ball. Courtney is both a wing and flanker for Burlington Women's Rugby Club. For Courtney, the way to be faster is to weigh less. So, she's currently in the middle of what's called a cut, a drop in her daily calories.
The hardest part about this cut for me is the hunger. No matter what time of day it is, I'm hungry and I'm thinking about food. It can be when I'm making my food for my next meal or prepping a meal for later on in the day. I'm thinking about it. I'm just so hungry. Even when I'm eating my food, I'm thinking about the next meal instead of focusing on what I'm currently eating. Every day and every meal, I track the macros of what I eat. So the macros being the fats, the carbs, and the proteins.
To some, a regimen like this may sound extreme, but for some players in rugby, the reason for a cut is a leaner body moves faster.
First is, if you don't have gas to last the full duration of the match, right? Say you're only kind of labeled as a 30 or 40 minute player. You don't have much gas. You have less mass to carry. You got a lot more juice in the tank in terms of the volume of oxygen you can maintain and hold.
I guess it's affected my endurance and my ability to go longer and not get as exhausted, because I guess being on this cut and not consuming as many calories when I'm constantly working out, I don't have enough energy to make it through.
For Courtney, there's a tough balance between losing weight for speed and getting fuel for energy. Rest and recovery is another hurdle for rugby players trying to get to the next level. Courtney works 3 jobs and has an erratic sleep schedule.
Come the weekend, Fridays and Saturdays, I'm working 10 p.m. till maybe 3, 4, 5 in the morning, meaning I'm not going to bed until the early hours of the morning.
Sleep is hugely underrated. There's a massive benefit to getting 8 to 10 hours of sleep a night minimum, and the performance of your athletes just skyrockets when they get that.
I mean, I do the cut because I want to better myself. I fell in love with rugby 2 years ago, and I'm not okay with just settling for myself, so I like to push myself to make myself better at the sport that I love.
The sport they love is filled with contradictions. Rugby is a game that requires athletes to run, sprint, tackle, wrestle, even fight for inches of territory. It can physically beat you and emotionally wear you down. But for these players, it meant something powerful. The opportunity to go to a national championship, becoming a mentor to future players, and the challenge of giving everything you've got.
We're here with John and Alex, and I don't know about you, but I sure learned a ton about rugby.
Definitely.
And it's very clear that you've got a lot of passion for this sport and that you play it a lot. Do you want to tell us about how that impacted your experience making this documentary?
So personally, as a player, a lot of the things that we filmed in our project were reflected from just what we saw. And I know that a lot of the pain and the injuries that we see players go through, a lot of the grit that people have, it allows them to overcome a lot of the struggles that they have. And I think that idea of self-preservation is very important for rugby players. I think it's shown through really well for our project.
Incredible.
So speaking of the injuries that the players obtain and their mentality, can you talk a little bit about the lifestyle that they put themselves through?
Yeah, so the lifestyle that these people put themselves through is, to people watching the documentary might think is a little absurd or over the top, but the reality of it is that these players are willing to do anything for the team and for themselves because they get 8 to 10 hours of sleep a night. They go to the gym for 3 hours a day, and they follow a strict diet, eating as close to nature as they possibly can. So they will do anything for the team.
Well, great documentary. Thank you both for being here.
Of course, thank you.
Recording, mixing, and mastering are the stages of audio production that may ring familiar.
But behind the music and production are people who deeply understand the science of sound. They're the engineers, the specialists who help everyone from recording artists to news reporters make music and content that sounds really, really good.
Max Bell and PJ Marchese take audio production pretty seriously themselves, which is why they chose this story. It's called Signal Flow.
Okay, did you get that?
In our modern media landscape, visual images constantly grab our attention. We process what we see instantly. Listening, on the other hand, is an acquired skill, where we often get better over time. For quality audio recordings, there are professionals who, in an intricate way, understand how we listen. They are a combination of artist and technician, masters of gathering, creating, and blending sound. Vermont has a robust audio production scene, where technicians bring years of experience. Walter Westinghouse teaches at Champlain College in Burlington and has been an engineer for 10 years.
Kind of take advantage or take charge of this. I got to mix Public Enemy at Higher Ground. Was probably in the first couple years that I worked there. I got to shake Chuck D's hand. Got to meet Waka Flocka Flame, got to shake his hand.
In fact, many of the engineers we met are products of the music world, including some at Vermont Public Radio.
I worked as assistant audio engineer
in Quad Studios in Times Square for many years. This place was a gangster rap house, so I spent a lot of time there working on gangster rap, which wasn't necessarily my favorite kind of music, but it was an interesting place to work. I had the opportunity to work with Biggie Smalls for several months.
No matter what the project, whether it's music, a voice recording, or a news story, it has to be recorded in the right room.
We take the sound of our studios and our performance areas really critically. In this room, for instance, there are no parallel walls. It is, built on a suspended floor, so the floor doesn't vibrate from ground effects, trucks going by and things like that. And all of our rooms are pretty much designed like that. We have the F-16s flying over every day, and you can't even hear them from inside this space.
Outside noise is one thing to consider, but all studios are built with different intentions, depending on what type of audio is recorded there.
All the way down to the ground, there is absolutely no touching. There's like foam and insulation between each room, so they're all decoupled. Ceiling is pitched, it's got that like farmhouse barn kind of look to it, but all of the panels are dropped down and they're held by these springs that I think one company in Utah makes. It's like really specialized.
Guilford Sound, near Brattleboro, is bigger than Meadowlark and looks more like other major studios you would find across the country.
The whole front wall is built around those soffit speakers, and they translate really well, or at least I'm used to them. I like them. I like the way they sound. They're not exhausting. They're really easy to listen to.
Egan Media in Colchester specializes in audio post-production for television, and again, the room is the key.
So this is my fourth and final studio. There's so much math in this room. There's tuned Helmholtz resonating cabinets in each corner. I think there's 36 of them. There's tuned membrane traps using mass-loaded vinyl and in a sealed enclosure. There's, I don't know how many cubic feet of Owens Corning 703 and 705.
In other words, studio architecture can be complex, but the main purpose is to make something that's practical and looks good.
They said that this type of material will be really great because within the room to have different types of material for the sound to bounce off or absorb helps kind of create a really nice live room sound. So you have the stone, you have wood, you have, if you look up at the top, you've got fabric panels hanging and on the wall. So having as many different types of materials for the sound to use actually benefits the recording. And it's just pretty.
A room needs the right equipment, from headphones so the artist can hear themselves, to huge guitar amplifiers. Engineers choose specific items for each performance. At first glance, recording studios look like they belong in science fiction movies, with all the knobs, dials, and meters, but some of the basics have never changed. And historically, one of the most important tools used in recording is the microphone.
As I speak, the sound waves produced by my voice are transmitted through the air to the microphone, where these sound waves are converted to changes in an electric current.
Microphones are not all the same. Different mics hear in different ways. Drums, guitar, and vocals all require specific types of mics and the particular placement to capture their distinct sounds. Here's an example of how big of a difference studio quality microphones make.
Hi, I'm Brian Tone, professional voiceover actor, and I'm recording through an iPhone 6.
Hi, I'm Brian Tone, professional voiceover actor, and I'm speaking to you through a GrooveTubes GT50 wide diaphragm condenser microphone.
Once every audio element has been recorded well, the engineer then mixes those separate ingredients into a final product. To do that, they use equalization, or EQ, a way of tweaking the frequencies of every recording.
EQ is the best way I can describe it to people, and since I teach like 100 level classes, is think about like your car EQ. We've all EQ'd our tuner in our car, highs, mids, and lows. and you're trying to make the best balance between the highs, the mids, the lows. For me, like when you start talking about EQ and frequency, I think about mixing. And I think about trying to EQ all the different instruments so that they fit with each other and they're not competing for space within a mix.
It's a matter of, you know, you're cutting those frequencies on some other instruments perhaps to let that guitar shine through. You're making space, you're crafting the acoustic landscape and kind of carving out space for different instruments so that it all blends together.
Listen to how manipulating EQ can have an effect on the sound of a simple voice track.
At this point, we're going to isolate all of the low frequencies.
And then here, we're going to isolate all of the high frequencies. EQ is just one of the many tools engineers have to achieve the artist's vision. After mixing comes mastering, a final pass to prepare for CDs and digital recordings.
It's a way to second check my work. So whenever you're mixing something, it's never done. At a certain point in the mix process, you get to the point where you can't listen to it anymore and you have to make decisions and it has to be done. And that's what the mastering engineer is there to do. They're there to improve the overall quality, like EQ, tonality, and loudness, volume, standard volume of the mix to be better than it was and to be competitive within the genre.
Engineers know technical proficiency will only get them so far. A huge part of the job is working with people, a skill that Dan Kruglak has acquired in his time at Meadowlark.
You're trying to take someone's song and vision and you kind of have to drive that. Once they play the song and you record it, you need to take it to the next point, which is where they want it to go. You just need to have great communication with somebody so you know you're not going to spend hours mixing something that may sound great but doesn't sound anything like they want their song to sound.
And you have to be able to deal with people and want to deal with people and interact with people and be on top of it. And then you also have to have a very high level of technical skill in the field and be able to do this all with grace of presence and poise of character at the same time.
It could be said, a great recording is something we enjoy without considering the effort that went into it. In a way, the work of the engineer is meant to be invisible, and when that work is good, it can lead to something great. But that takes dedication and patience.
Very nice.
It's funny, I heard an interview with John Williams being interviewed by Tavis Smiley from NPR. And Tavis asked him, like, well, what do you think about every time you get something new? You know, every time you're about to start a new project. And he said, I just want to make it better than the last one. And I laughed. I was like, oh my God, John Williams says that. And that's what I say like all the time. Like, it just has to be better than the last thing I did. Like, that's the whole goal. It doesn't matter if the last thing I did was a corporate industrial or a film or a trailer or a reality show, or it doesn't matter. Like, it just has to be better.
Imagine sitting in a dark room, constantly trying to make something better. It's a fair question for any engineer. What drives them?
Because it's all I want to do. I come in here 7 days a week. I'm here all the time. I love it here. I mean, I love my family, and I often miss my family, but I love being here. Monday morning is, when I get to go back to work, is a highlight. And I think everybody should have a gig that they do, a job that they do for a living that is where they'd rather be than any other place in the world. I feel so lucky to be able to do what I love. And I'm not really qualified to do anything else.
Do you mind giving us a clap?
No.
Thank you.
Great. I guess Daniel Kruglak.
We have Max and PJ here. So guys, really good job on the film. It just looks really beautiful when you watch it. What inspired you guys to choose this story to pursue?
Yeah, so PJ and I first originally met and bonded over audio, and we always sort of looked at productions and noticed the audio and the work that went into that. So we, coming up into the capstone project, we really wanted to make a piece that personified audio and sort of pulled the curtain back on how it's done.
Yeah, it makes sense. Cool.
You guys clearly spent a lot of time going around the state to visit a lot of different production places. Do you have any favorites that you went to?
Yeah, we're really grateful to have gotten to all the different studios we went to, and it's really hard to pick any favorites from there, but being able to go to VPR, a place that we've toured on multiple Champlain field trips, be able to talk with their engineers and really get a chance to look at their studio was a great opportunity. And then our road trip to Guilford, Vermont, right down to southern Vermont to visit Guilford Sound was a great trip, definitely worth it, and yeah.
Cool, thanks for being here, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you a lot.
If you have a solid sense of your identity and a clear vision for your future, well, all I can say is you probably haven't been in many of my classes.
Champlain, perhaps like many colleges, is filled with people searching for answers about their inner selves and their forward direction. That complex subject intrigued our classmate, Karina Bachik, because she's had her own deep personal questions on these core ideas.
Karina's story is called Who Are We and Where Are We Going?
I remember being 5 or 6 and constantly asking questions. Running up to my mom and asking her, what am I? You know, what are those ethnicities that I am? What am I? What are you? What's Dad? Where do I get what I am from? I remember she said, you are German, Polish, Hungarian, and Italian. Only those 4 things. And I remember counting on my fingers as she said it. I wanted to be able to fill out my whole hand or both of my hands. You know, I wanted more. Then years later, it wasn't me asking that question. At the beginning of my freshman year of college, I went to a dinner with about 15 people. Then I got the question, what are you? Everyone at the table was looking at me. Then suddenly, there was a wave of people telling me what they thought I was.
Asian,
Puerto Rican,
Mexican,
Indian,
French,
Spanish,
Canadian,
Cherokee,
African American.
It was a cruel game. And it wasn't even that I was being mocked. It was that it just all struck a nerve. Since I was 3, I knew that my parents were divorced and that my half-sister had a different dad than I did. And now I think that there's a connection between the confusion about my parents and me constantly asking my mom, what am I? Of course, none of that confusion has ever gone away. You know, it still follows me as a senior in college. I've met my best friends since starting school, and they've helped me figure out some parts of my identity. But like me, they have their own struggles, different stories, and the same questions. Who are we and where are we going? I guess you could say I've been lucky. I've had a steady group of friends in college, and in some ways, they're just as confused about things as I am. This is Kayla. She's been my roommate since freshman year. At first, she might seem shy or standoffish, but deep down, she's passionate, strong-willed, and one badass chick. Then Aurora. She's an interesting mix of serious and funny, a creative spirit who excels at just about everything. Finally, Ben, who's the first to mock a situation or himself.
I feel sad all the time.
To me, they're friends. To themselves, they're a lot of things.
I am a future educator.
I am straight, which is, you know, it's kind of.
I'm a professional writing major. Kayla has always been my rock. What's interesting about her is she's constantly evaluating her actions.
Part of just trying to be a good person, when you think about your actions and think about if they're good or bad, or trying to change them, or trying to analyze them, or trying to just be like, why am I doing this? Even if you aren't the best person, you're trying to be, so you're at least a better person than most. I mean, I've definitely made some, you know, decisions that I don't like, and I think I've, you know, trying to be more open-minded and all that.
And what I love about her is that she's not afraid to tell me what's on her mind.
Being so close for 4 years, that has been such a complex journey, and everything that has happened in our college careers, we've been right beside each other for. Everything, the ups and downs, it's all been, when we've changed, it's like we've changed together. And I think that's been such a cool journey to have with somebody.
I often looked at Aurora as the one who was always organized and had her stuff together. But inside, it's a little different.
I'm a little dependent as a person. I definitely rely on other people's opinions when making decisions for myself. Like, I'll always ask people for advice, a lot of people usually. When I got bangs, I asked probably 50 people if I should get bangs. And that's not something I need to ask everyone, because it's my hair, my body, I could just do it. But sometimes I feel like I need that validation.
Here's the thing. Aurora's a student teacher in a 3rd grade class, and in front of little kids, she doesn't need validation. Ben grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and is the first to recognize his privilege.
It was never like my life was bad or hard. There are people whose lives are difficult and who will just have the deck stacked against them for whatever reason. There are people who live in war zones. There are people who live in hunger. I just had braces for a long time, a really long time. I had braces for 8 years.
On the one hand, Ben's a comedian. On the other, he's always wanted to be treated like the adult in the room.
I always wanted to read whatever book my brother had just finished reading, even though it was 5 years older than me, and it's there's a big change in a lot of those 5 years in various age groups of just ability to process information. But I would read stuff that I would not understand, even a little bit. But yeah, my whole life I wanted everyone to know how cool and grown up and serious I was.
There are some things everyone learns how to cover up. For me, it's showing how uncomfortable something makes me, like awkwardly laughing when people told me what I was. All of my friends have something they've learned to hide. For Aurora, it's her battle with social anxiety.
My first year was kind of hard. I mean, I kind of let it take over my life, to be honest. I used to just have long panic attacks because I didn't know how to stop them.
Ben has a number of challenges that include depression and attention deficit disorder since 4th grade.
I struggled with religion for a while because I'm Jewish, and I had a very similar experience with Sunday school to as I did with traditional school, what with me being disruptive and distracting the other children so that we couldn't learn about the Maccabees and the Hanukkah story and the Hebrew alphabet. So I basically ditched that.
Kayla struggles with being judgmental in her interactions with others.
I've always had a really hard time where I think of a certain thing and how I act. I think other people should be doing the same, especially in friendships, meeting my level of friendship, which is an intense level, I will admit. And just can't control other people, and you can't control other people's actions, even if they're good or bad or they make you upset or whatever, and letting that go. Even if they make a choice and it hurt you and it's a bad choice, not letting yourself steamroll over that constantly, being what could have you done, what could have you not have done, and just letting things be a little bit.
And to some extent, like mine, their parents have influenced who they are today.
I mean, my parents harshly characterized how miserable going to law school made them. So that's never been something that I'm super self-conscious about. Maybe I should be more conscious of hey man, are you gonna be okay in the future? Are these prospects viable in any way? But it's part of who I am, for better and worse.
My parents have very opposite personalities, and sometimes I think I'm smack in the middle. My dad is a huge planner, and like all about the logistics. And I definitely have that part of me that's a planner and organized and wants to have everything figured out. But then there's my mom. She is a go with the flow kind of girl and indulgent, kind of a treat yourself kind of girl, which I am too, I have to say. So then it's kind of this battle of like, oh, treat yourself, you deserve it, and then no, panic about the future.
With my parents and their relationship, they each have their separate lives, but they're still so strong together. And seeing like how they still come home together and have dinner and they still kiss each other goodbye every time. And I think finding somewhere where I can build something like that with somebody is like, it is really important to me.
So where do we go from here? And how do we take what we've learned about ourselves into the next phase of our lives? Ben doesn't exactly have a plan. He knows he wants to work on writing for a show and finding that path between being grown up and funny. Aurora, she'll be a certified teacher somewhere, probably in New England. She's got it all figured out, except for when she doesn't. Kayla knows that wherever she will be, it's the close friendships that will matter. As for me, I've learned a lot more about who I am by the people I surrounded myself with, and that's something you just can't plan.
We're here with Karina, and I just wanted to say thank you for making such a relatable piece. And I wanted to ask, what inspired you to make this?
So last year, I made a smaller piece for my social media production class, and I wanted to explore that more. I did like a smaller piece, and just being able to explore my own identity, but also expand that to my friends was something that really was important to me.
And now a big part of this piece was you had to open up and be a little emotional on camera, and so did your friends. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. It was really hard because I don't like being on camera at all. So being able to actually open up about such a personal thing took a long time. Like a lot of takes, a lot of trying to find that authenticity of it, and also in the interview process of talking to my friends, and kind of like, we're all very goofy, but also, you know, we have these discussions that are very important in finding who we are and being able to make them comfortable and make it more of a conversation versus, you know, it being like, oh, you know, be perfect for the camera is something that really worked, I think.
Great, thanks Karina, good job.
Thank you.
We close our program on a musical note. House concerts are what they sound like, smaller musical events that happen inside private homes.
These types of shows are increasingly common for a number of reasons. They're a way for artists to make money, but also a way for music lovers to see performers in an unusual, intimate setting.
For this piece, Jenna Misra and Olivia Lyons introduce us to some wonderful musicians, not to mention the great people who opened up their homes to them.
Jenna and Olivia's story is called House Concerts, the Unseen Music Scene.
I do remember very clearly when we first looked at this house, and it's just the two of us, our first thought was, I don't think we need this much room. And then we kind of looked at each other and we were like, house concerts.
I want to have magic everywhere. I'll put lights out, I'll put candles everywhere. I'll make the home feel really comfortable and magical so that when people enter, they're in the mood of something inspiring that's gonna happen.
A few shows ago, one of the artists on stage started crying. The song she'd written was so emotional for her. To be able to perform it in front of, 75 people who were listening made a huge difference.
It was overwhelming.
A house concert? We answer that question a lot, actually. It's oddly enough exactly what it sounds like. It's a concert in somebody's house, in this case our house, and it's a lot like a venue concert, except it's just way more casual and intimate.
I would say it's almost like an elaborate dinner party.
Just a big community that supports music, and people seem to like that sense of belonging, of getting together.
But that's often what happens at house concerts is they're not household names for the most part. There are a lot of emerging artists that are looking to get some exposure. So it gives them a chance to play, to develop their fan base, to maybe sell some CDs, to find a place to crash.
Yeah. We live in Stansted. When we moved there 9 years ago, there was no live music. We were trying to get creative about, how do you bring music into a town where there aren't venues. I said to my wife that I was going to invite bands to come play in our living room. She rolled her eyes, and then I dropped a bunch of CDs on her desk about 3 months later and said, these are the bands that are coming. And it's been 50 concerts later.
But I kept the pace steady. I was ready to see the sun again. Life is stormy, baby.
It can go a lot of different ways. Sometimes I just get paid a flat fee, or it could be a ticketed event. Sometimes I've done house concerts where it includes like a buffet and your ticket gets you food and all this stuff. Sometimes it's a potluck. It can change and it does change with every venue.
The idea is to connect people and artists, and our particular model is that we start with a potluck dinner so that we break down any anonymity. And we introduce the artists to their audience so that they can connect as humans first, and then there's a concert.
Everybody has, different musicians that they like and bring different touches. We actually don't have tickets. We do a RSVP because the whole model we set this up on is that it's a private event. We invite people, they make donations to the band, and then the band keeps those donations.
At this point, these have always been public, but never we're not putting out signs and advertising. It is a word of mouth kind of thing.
It's gonna feel like running to nothing, going nowhere fast, feels like crawling, stalling, coming in.
Not your typical stage audience experience. You kind of get thrown into a very small space generally, and you're sort of forced into these interpersonal dynamics that are kind of more difficult than the average show at a venue or a festival.
And how cool, you could be anywhere in the whole world and you're sitting here listening to me play these songs I make up. It's so cool. Oh, what a world.
We've been to ones where it's literally just in somebody's living room and they move some chairs in and no amplification, no lights or anything. We've been to some that are very professional.
There is a little bit more freedom because, you know, usually you're running your own sound, so you can get everything how you want it.
The prospect of it being in somebody's house, he could have it go as long as he wanted to.
I love the idea that we focus on emerging voices. We get about 200 proposals a month from around the world. Yeah, it's crazy. And then we book artists.
Artists will go through Hal, because Hal knows all the artists, and because of the stands that the house concerts that he has built. He uses the farm as one of the venues.
Generally, almost all the time, we're putting the band up, we're feeding them dinner, we're feeding them breakfast. That is the expense we absorb, and then, like Doug said, 100% of the proceeds go to the artist.
When I first started playing and touring and booking shows myself, I would do a lot of house shows. Anything I could play, I would just try to do it.
House concerting can be very sustainable and can pay for other expenses on the road that when you're getting started and you're building a fan base, you don't always have a great draw. A lot of people don't necessarily come those first few times you play in a new city. And so having what we like to call an anchor gig, by having a house concert that you know is going to provide the financial and moral and loving support that we need to do what we do.
Do we enjoy letting strangers into the house so they can have this experience? Yes, we do, because it's such an overwhelmingly positive response.
If you want to have these kind of experiences, you have to be open to saying, it's not just my friends, and mostly it's people who love music.
All I see are lights, all I see are lights, all I see are lights. All I see are lights. All I see are lights.
The whole vibe of a house concert is our open home, open arms. All are welcome. You may come as a stranger, but you leave with a million friends.
People are very relaxed, they're themselves. A lot of people here tonight did not know each other. Some people who came tonight, I did not know, I had never met. Even the artists, these artists I had never met before, but it's as if we have known each other for a very long time.
Surrounded by breakable things.
You're looking out into a living room of dimly lit people, and you can see their twitches when they hear a certain lyric. You can literally see a tear streaming down their face. You can see them elbow their neighbor when they've said something that is applicable to them, and oh, hello. And also animals. House concerts are great for animal experiences. Look at this. I don't even know who this is, but I love him, her.
It makes me a lot more nervous. I feel like when I'm just playing to like less people, because you're like, okay, I can see everybody's eyes. They're all looking at me. I'm nervous, like that kind of thing. But it's really, you're playing for your friends, or it's just a lot lighter of a show.
Passion, passion is worth leave it here, escape the earth.
The first time they open their mouth and start to sing, that it just feels like they're singing directly to you and to your soul.
Many nights where we're home after the show's over, and we just look at each other and we're like, wow, that was incredible. And it happens all the time.
Flowers in the window, drenched in golden light. Thank you. How's your coffee in the morning? They make it just the way you like. You have a stroll around the neighborhood midday, singing wouldn't it be nice?
We are joined by Jenna and Olivia. You two did a great job capturing the atmosphere that you saw at house concerts. What drew you into the story?
So we both knew that house concerts existed, but neither of us really had an understanding of the importance of the community aspect of it all and how emotional the shows really were. And we just wanted to share that with people in hopes that they would seek out house shows around them and have an amazing experience just like we did.
Great. What was it like bringing cameras into such an intimate setting? Was it difficult to be discreet or respectful?
So we definitely worried about this in the beginning, but the hosts were all so welcoming, and the people who were attending the concerts, everyone understood that, we were there to film, just as the artist was there to play music, and there was just a really great mutual understanding. So.
That's awesome. Thank you guys so much for being here.
That's our show. Thank you so much for watching Champlain Presents. We'd like to extend a special thank you to our professor, Keith Oppenheim.
And a special thank you to Jess Wilson and the Media Factory. And a thank you for watching.
Bye.
Bye.